I spent every penny of my dead husband's life insurance on a farm I'd never seen before. $90,000 for 40 acres in the middle of nowhere. Oregon. The real estate agent tried to talk me out of it, said the place had history, said it had been empty for over 20 years, said I should at least visit before making an offer. But I didn't care. After Richard died, I couldn't stay in our Portland house anymore. Every room whispered his absence. I needed to disappear. I arrived at sunset, unlocked the front door, and stepped into the smell of dust and decades of silence. Someone had covered all the furniture with white sheets, like ghosts waiting in the darkness. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the room. That's when I saw them. Photographs. Dozens of them, covering the entire wall above the fireplace. Black and white, faded color prints, Polaroids with curling edges. All of me. Me in my 20s, standing in front of a barn I'd never seen. Me in a wedding dress I'd never worn, holding wildflowers, smiling at a camera I had no memory of. Me with my arms around a tall, dark-haired man I had never met in my life. A man looking at me with such complete adoration, it made my chest tighten. My hands started shaking. This had to be a mistake. A coincidence. Someone who looked like me. But then I saw it. A small table in the corner with a single envelope on top. Cream-colored paper. Expensive. My name written across the front in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. Richard's handwriting. I opened the letter with numb fingers. Eleanor, if you're reading this, then you finally found the truth about who I really was. And who you used to be. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I'm sorry I had to let you forget. But it was the only way to keep you safe. The farm was always yours. It was always waiting. And so was he. I stood there in the darkness of a house I didn't recognize, surrounded by photographs of a life I couldn't remember, holding proof that my husband of 36 years had been keeping a secret so massive, it required erasing my entire past. The next morning, I started searching. In boxes in the attic, I found bills addressed to Thomas and Eleanor Brennan. This address dated from 1992 to 1998. Photo album showing me living on this farm, married to that dark-haired stranger, radiantly happy in a way I didn't recognize in myself. A diary in my own handwriting describing years I had no memory of living. And then I found the newspaper clipping. Thomas Brennan, 34, died February 8, 1999, in a single-car accident on Highway 20. He is survived by his wife, Eleanor. Services at St. Francis Catholic Church, 1999, 25 years ago. According to these documents, I had been married to Thomas Brennan. I had lived on this farm. I had been in the car when he died. And I had survived with severe head trauma that stole every memory of the life we'd built together. But I remembered nothing. Not Thomas, not the farm, not the accident. My earliest clear memory was meeting Richard in Seattle in 1988, marrying him in 1989, living our quiet, modest life together in Portland. Except that timeline was impossible. If I'd been married to Thomas until 1999, then my entire life with Richard was, what? A reconstruction? A lie? When I went into town looking for answers, people recognized me immediately. The waitress at Mary's Diner turned white as a ghost. The former deputy who'd responded to my accident couldn't believe I was back. They all said the same thing. After Thomas died, a woman claiming to be my sister took me away to Seattle, said I'd never recover, said I needed specialized care. But I've never had a sister. And then I learned about Jacob, Thomas's younger brother, a man who blamed me for the accident, who said I'd been driving that night, who'd spent years harassing me, threatening me, obsessed with making me pay for his brother's death. A man who was still alive, still in Oregon, still waiting. The day I found all of this out, I came home to find him standing on my porch. Older now, gray-haired, his face carved with decades of rage and grief. He looked at me with pure hatred and said, "You shouldn't have come back. Now I'm trapped between two lives I can't reconcile. The police report says Thomas was driving the night he died, that it was ice and darkness and terrible luck. But Jacob won't believe it. He's convinced I killed his brother and got away with it by conveniently losing my memory. Richard is dead, so I can't ask him why he lied, why he let me forget, why he sent me back here after all these years. Thomas is dead, and I can't remember loving him even though the evidence is everywhere. In photographs, in letters, in the way this entire town looks at me with a mixture of grief and relief. I found Thomas's mother's final letter yesterday. She died 10 years ago, but she left instructions. If I ever came back, I was supposed to receive the deed to the farm that had been tied up in legal battles with Jacob for 25 years. The farm that was about to revert to him if I didn't claim it before the end of this year. Richard's timing wasn't accidental. He made sure I found this place just in time to save it from the man who wants to destroy me. But why? Why protect me in death but not explain anything in life? Why erase an entire marriage, an entire version of myself, only to send me back to face it all alone? Last night, I heard a truck engine idling on the road beyond my property. I stood at the window in the darkness and watched the headlights. Just sitting there, watching the house, watching me. I don't know if it's Jacob or someone else. I don't know if I'm in danger or if I'm just paranoid. I don't know if the life I remember is real or if this life, the one I can't remember, is the truth I've been running from for 25 years. All I know is this. I bought a farm to escape my grief, and instead I found a past that won't let me go. A dead husband who loved me enough to make me forget. Another dead husband who loved me enough to send me back. And a living man who hates me enough to wait 25 years for revenge. The photographs are still on the wall. The woman in them is smiling, unguarded, deeply in love with a man whose face I study every night trying to remember something, anything, about him. Sometimes I think I can almost feel it. A flicker at the edge of my mind, like a dream I can't quite hold on to. The sound of his laugh, the way his hands looked when he worked, the smell of sawdust and coffee and home. But then it's gone, and I'm just a 66-year-old widow standing alone in a farmhouse full of ghosts, trying to figure out which version of my life was real and which one was the lie I told myself to survive. The only thing I know for certain is this. I came here looking for peace. What I found was a truth I'm not sure I can survive knowing. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the price. 40 acres of Oregon farmland, a 3-bedroom house with original hardwood floors, a barn that still had its bones intact, all for $90,000. In today's market, that was like finding a Rembrandt at a yard sale. But I was 66 years old, freshly widowed, and I'd spent the last 8 months watching the walls of my Portland home close in on me like a slow-motion coffin. I didn't want a bargain. I wanted an escape. The real estate agent, a nervous man named Derek with a wispy mustache and sweat stains under his arms despite the October chill, had driven me out to see the property 3 weeks after Richard's funeral. I'd found the listing online at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, scrolling through properties in Eastern Oregon with a glass of wine turning warm in my hand. Full disclosure, Mrs. Voss, Derek had said as we turned off Highway 20 onto a gravel road that cut through ponderosa pines and golden grass. The place has been empty for over 20 years. There's some history. Previous owner passed, estate issues, legal complications. It's been in limbo. I'd nodded, not really listening. Through the windshield, I could see the Cascade Mountains rising in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The landscape was so different from the evergreen dampness of Portland. Drier, wider, lonelier. Exactly what I wanted. What kind of history? I'd asked, more out of politeness than curiosity. Derek had shifted in his seat. Just, small town stuff. Nothing that affects the property value. Which meant something that absolutely affected the property value. But he was hoping I wouldn't ask. I didn't ask. We'd walked through the house together, Derek pointing out the good bones, the solid foundation, the potential. I'd barely heard him. I was too busy feeling the silence. It was the kind of silence that had weight, that pressed against your eardrums and made you aware of your own heartbeat. After 8 months of well-meaning friends stopping by with casseroles and sympathy, after 8 months of my daughter Emily calling every other day from Boston to check if I was okay, after 8 months of waking up in an empty bed and having to remember all over again that Richard was gone, this silence felt like mercy. "I'll take it," I'd said. Derek had blinked. "Don't you want to see the upstairs? The barn? We should talk about inspections, contingencies." "I'll take it," I'd repeated. Cash offer. No contingencies. He'd tried to talk me out of it, bless him. Said I should think it over, bring my daughter out to see it, get a proper inspection. But I'd made up my mind. 3 weeks later, I'd signed the papers. 2 weeks after that, I'd packed up everything I couldn't bear to leave behind, which wasn't much, and loaded it into a U-Haul. Emily had been furious. "Mom, you can't just disappear to the middle of nowhere," she'd said over FaceTime, her face pixelated with poor connection, her infant son wailing in the background. "What if something happens? What if you get hurt? You'll be hours from a decent hospital." "I'll be fine," I'd told her, which was what I always told her. "This isn't healthy," she'd pressed. "You're isolating yourself. Grief counseling would be better than then running away to some creepy old farmhouse. It's not creepy, I'd lied. It's peaceful. She'd sighed, that particular sigh that meant I'm too tired to argue, but I'm not giving up. At least let me come visit once you're settled. Of course, I'd said, knowing I'd find excuses to delay her. I loved my daughter. I did. But right now, love felt like a weight I didn't have the strength to carry. Now, standing in the driveway as the autumn sun sank behind the mountains and turned the sky the color of a bruise, I felt the first whisper of doubt. The farmhouse looked different in the fading light. Smaller somehow. More hunched. The white paint was peeling in long strips, and several of the upstairs windows were dark and hollow-looking. The barn leaned slightly to the left, its red paint weathered to the color of dried blood. The grass in the yard had grown waist-high, moving in the breeze like something breathing. I stood there longer than I should have, keys in my hand, the engine of the U-Haul ticking as it cooled. Just go inside, Eleanor. It's just a house. But my feet didn't want to move. I thought about Richard, about the way he used to stand in doorways. One hand braced against the frame, watching me with this quiet expression I'd never quite been able to read. We'd been married for 36 years, and there were still parts of him I didn't understand. He'd been a man of few words, a retired postal worker who'd spent his days walking routes through Portland neighborhoods, learning people's rhythms, remembering their dogs' names. He'd been steady, reliable, kind in a way that didn't announce itself. I'd loved him the way you love a good coat, grateful, comfortable, not questioning it too much. Was that terrible? Was that an awful thing to think about your dead husband? I shook my head, trying to dislodge the thought. The grief counselor I'd seen exactly twice before, deciding she was useless, had said it was normal to feel ambivalent, to remember the complicated parts along with the good. But ambivalence felt like betrayal when the person was gone and couldn't defend themselves. The front porch steps creaked under my weight. The wood was soft in places, spongy with rot. I'd have to replace them. Add it to the list of things I didn't know how to do. The key stuck in the lock. I had to jiggle it, put my shoulder against the door. It finally gave with a groan that sounded almost human. The smell hit me first. Dust, old wood, something faintly sweet and rotten underneath, like fruit left too long in a bowl. I fumbled for a light switch, found one, flipped it. Nothing, of course. The power company had said they'd have it turned on by today, but today in rural Oregon apparently meant whenever we get around to it. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating shapes draped in white sheets. Furniture. Someone had covered all the furniture with sheets. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. The beam of light swept across the room. A couch, 2 armchairs, a coffee table. Everything frozen in time, preserved like a museum exhibit. Why would someone cover the furniture if the house was going to sit empty for 20 years? I moved deeper into the room. The fireplace was massive, built from river stone, its mantle thick with dust. Above it, I stopped. Photographs. Dozens of them, covering the wall in a haphazard collage. Frames of different sizes, different styles. I raised my phone, let the light play across them. A young woman standing in front of a barn. She was smiling, her hair caught by wind, her hand shading her eyes from the sun. A wedding photo. The same woman in a simple white dress, holding wildflowers, standing next to a tall man in a dark suit. A candid shot, the couple on a porch swing, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Another, the woman laughing, flower on her face, holding up her hands in mock surrender. My chest went tight. The woman in the photographs was me. Younger, maybe 25, 30 at most, but unmistakably me. Same nose, same jawline, same slightly crooked smile. Even the way she stood, weight shifted to one hip, arms crossed, that was me. But I'd never been to this place before in my life. I'd never worn that wedding dress. I'd never met the man standing beside me in those photos. My hand started to shake, the light from my phone jerking across the wall. I took a step closer, then another, until I was close enough to see the details. The man was handsome in an unassuming way. Strong jaw, dark hair, eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. In every photo, he was looking at the woman, at me, with this expression of complete adoration. Who the hell was he? I backed away from the wall, my mind spinning. This had to be a mistake. A coincidence. Maybe the previous owner looked like me. Maybe... My foot hit something. I looked down. A small wooden table in the corner of the room. The the kind you'd put a lamp on. And on top of it, a single envelope. Cream-colored, expensive paper. My name written across the front in handwriting I would have recognized in my sleep. Richard's handwriting. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My phone light made the envelope glow like something holy, something dangerous. Around me, the house settled with soft creaks and sighs. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I reached out. My fingers were numb. The envelope felt heavy, heavier than paper should feel. I opened it. The letter inside was short, just a few lines in Richard's careful, measured script. Eleanor, if you're reading this, then you finally found the truth about who I really was, and who you used to be. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I'm sorry I had to let you forget, but it was the only way to keep you safe. The farm was always yours. It was always waiting, and so was he. I'm sorry. For everything. R. The letter slipped from my hand and drifted to the floor. I stood there in the darkness of a house I didn't remember, surrounded by photographs of a life I didn't recognize, holding the impossible truth that my husband of 36 years had been keeping a secret so large it had required erasing my entire past. Outside, something moved in the yard. I spun toward the window, heart hammering. For just a second, less than a second, I thought I saw the silhouette of a man standing at the edge of the tree line, watching the house. Then the wind gusted. The tall grass bent, and there was nothing. Nothing but the darkness and the silence and the weight of a life I couldn't remember crushing down on me like stones. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, surrounded by ghosts I couldn't name. And for the first time since Richard died, I cried. I didn't sleep that first night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photographs. Saw my own face looking back at me from a life I had no memory of living. I'd pulled one of the sheets off the couch and wrapped it around myself like armor, sitting in the darkness with my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for the sun to rise. When it finally did, pale and cold through the dusty windows, I felt something inside me shift from shock into something harder, something like anger. Richard had lied to me. For 36 years, he'd lied. I stood up, my joints stiff and aching, and walked back to the wall of photographs. In the daylight, they looked even more impossible. There was no mistaking it. That was my face, my body, my smile. But the woman in those pictures had a lightness to her that I didn't recognize, a kind of unguarded joy that felt foreign. The man beside her in most of the photos had kind eyes, laugh lines, carpenter's hands. I could see it in the way he held himself, the practical strength in his shoulders. In one photo, he was mid-laugh, his head thrown back, and the woman, me, was looking at him with such naked love that I had to turn away. Who were you, I thought? And why can't I remember you? I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every photograph on the wall. Then I searched the rest of the house. The kitchen was frozen in time. A 1970s avocado green stove, a porcelain sink with rust stains, a table with 4 chairs. The cabinets still held dishes, mismatched mugs, a set of wine glasses wrapped in newspaper dated 1998. In the fridge, mercifully empty and unplugged, I found a shopping list stuck to the door with a magnet shaped like Oregon. The handwriting was feminine, looping: eggs, bread, chicken thighs, butter, rosemary, candles, for church. My handwriting? I couldn't tell. It didn't look like how I wrote now, but that didn't mean anything. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. The master had a wedding ring quilt on the bed, faded but carefully made. A pair of men's work boots sat by the door, still caked with dried mud. On the dresser, a hairbrush with long dark strands still tangled in the bristles. I picked up the brush with shaking hands and held it to the light. The hair was the same color mine had been before it turned gray. In the closet, I found women's clothes in my size: jeans, flannel shirts, a blue dress with small white flowers. I pulled the dress out and held it against myself. It would fit. It would absolutely fit. I dropped it like it had burned me. The second bedroom was empty except for boxes. Dozens of them stacked against the walls, sealed with packing tape. I opened one at random. Photo albums. I opened another. More albums, along with loose photographs in envelopes. A third box held papers. Bills, receipts, letters. I sat down on the floor and started going through them. The bills were addressed to Thomas and Eleanor Brennan. The address was this farm. The dates ranged from 1992 to 1998. Electric bills, water bills, A mortgage statement showing the house had been paid off in 1996. There were receipts from the Bend Lumber Company, from Mary's Diner in town, from St. Francis Catholic Church. St. Francis. I'd seen that name on the shopping list. Candles for church. I found a wedding announcement from the Bend Bulletin dated June 15, 1991. Eleanor Marie Caldwell and Thomas James Brennan were married Saturday at St. Francis Catholic Church. The bride wore her mother's dress. The couple will reside on the groom's family farm outside Bend. Eleanor Marie Caldwell. That had been my maiden name. I was sure of it. Except, no, my maiden name was Eleanor Marie Foster. I'd been born in Seattle. I'd grown up in Seattle. I'd met Richard at a church charity event in 1988, married him in 1989. Except here was a newspaper clipping saying I'd married someone else in 1991. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to stop the room from spinning. Think, Eleanor. Think. I pulled out my phone and searched for Thomas James Brennan. The results came back quickly. An obituary from February 1999. Thomas James Brennan, 34, of Bend, died February 8th in a single-car accident on Highway 20. He is survived by his wife, Eleanor, his brother, Jacob, and his mother, Patricia Brennan of Sisters. A carpenter and lifelong resident of Central Oregon, Thomas was known for his generosity, his craftsmanship, and his love of the land. Services will be held at St. Francis Catholic Church. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. February 1999. Richard had died in September of this year, 2024. Which meant that 25 years ago, I had apparently been married to a man named Thomas Brennan, and he had died in a car accident. But I had no memory of it. No memory of him, of this house, of any of it. I stood up too fast and had to grab the wall to steady myself. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't possible. You couldn't just forget years of your life. You couldn't, unless you could. I'd read articles about it. Traumatic brain injuries. Dissociative amnesia. People who lost chunks of their past, sometimes permanently. But I'd never had a head injury. I'd never been in an accident. Had I? I went back downstairs, moving faster now, searching with purpose. In the living room, I found a bookshelf I'd missed in the darkness last night. Photo albums lined the bottom shelf. I grabbed the first one and flipped it open. Wedding photos. Me in a simple white dress, the same one from the picture on the wall, standing next to Thomas Brennan. We were on the steps of a small church, rice in our hair, laughing. The next page showed us cutting a cake, feeding each other with our fingers. Then dancing, my head on his chest, his hands splayed across my back. I looked happy, deeply, genuinely happy. I flipped faster. Our honeymoon, somewhere with mountains and wildflowers. Photos of us working on the farm, painting the barn, planting a garden. Christmas photos with an older woman who must have been Thomas's mother. Birthday parties. Ordinary moments. Cooking together in the kitchen, reading on the porch, walking through fields of golden grass. A life. A whole life. And I remembered none of it. I was halfway through the 3rd album when I found the newspaper clipping tucked between pages. It was from the Bend Bulletin, dated February 10, 1999. Local man dies in highway crash. Thomas Brennan, 34, was killed Monday night when his truck slid on black ice on Highway 20 near milepost 23. His wife, Eleanor, 32, was critically injured and airlifted to St. Charles Medical Center in Bend. According to Oregon State Police, the accident occurred around 9 p.m. during a winter storm. No other vehicles were involved. Brennan was pronounced dead at the scene. His wife remains in critical condition with severe head trauma. Severe head trauma. I sat back, the album sliding from my lap. Head trauma. Brain injury. Memory loss. It was real. All of it was real. But why hadn't anyone told me? Why had Richard? A sound from outside made me freeze. Footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, deliberate. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Through the window, I saw a truck pulling up. An old Ford, paint faded, rust around the wheel wells. A man got out. He was maybe 60, stocky, with gray hair and a weathered face. He stood looking at the house for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he started walking toward the front door. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. Should I answer? Should I hide? I didn't know this place, didn't know who was a threat and who wasn't. The knock came. 3 sharp raps. Mrs. Brennan? A man's voice, rough but not unfriendly. You in there? Mrs. Brennan. He'd called me Mrs. Brennan. I didn't answer. Look, I saw the U-Haul. The voice continued. I'm Sam Carver. I own the property next door. Just wanted to see if you needed anything. It's been a long time since anyone's been here. I stood frozen, debating. Finally, I walked to the door and opened it a crack, keeping the chain lock engaged. The man on the porch looked surprised to see me, then confused, then something else. Something that looked almost like recognition mixed with shock. Jesus, he breathed. You really are back. I'm sorry, I said, my voice shaky. I think there's been a misunderstanding. My name is Eleanor Voss. I just bought this property. Voss? Sam frowned. You're telling me you're not Eleanor Brennan? I stopped. Was I? I don't know what I am. Sam's expression softened. He took off his baseball cap, held it in his hands. Ma'am, I don't know what's going on here, but you look exactly like Eleanor Brennan, Thomas's wife. And if you bought this place, you should know. There's some complicated history here. I'm starting to figure that out, I said quietly. Did you know them? Thomas and Eleanor? Knew them? Sam let out a long breath. Ma'am, Thomas was my best friend. And after he died, after you... He stopped himself. After the accident, you disappeared. Your family took you back to Seattle. Said you'd never be the same, that you couldn't remember anything. We thought you were gone for good. I was in Seattle, I said slowly. I've been in Seattle for... I don't know. I thought I'd lived there my whole life. Sam studied me, his eyes sad. How much do you remember? Nothing, I whispered. I don't remember any of this. Not Thomas? Not this place? None of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, does the name Jacob Brennan mean anything to you? A chill went down my spine. No, who is he? Thomas's younger brother. After Thomas died, Jacob... Sam rubbed his face. Look, you should probably know. Jacob blamed you for the accident. Said you were driving. Said you killed his brother. It wasn't true. The police report was clear, but Jacob couldn't let it go. He harassed you, threatened you. That's why your family took you away. I gripped the door frame. Is he still here? In Bend? He was. Last I heard, he moved to Redmond about 10 years ago. But if he finds out you're back... Sam shook his head. You might want to be careful. Thank you, I managed, for telling me. Sam put his hat back on. If you need anything, and I mean anything, my place is a mile down the road. White house with green shutters. I've got a landline. The number's in the phone book. He paused. And ma'am, I'm glad you're back. Thomas loved this place. He'd be happy knowing you were here. I watched him walk back to his truck, my mind reeling. When he drove away, I closed the door and leaned against it. Jacob Brennan, Thomas's brother. A man who blamed me for his brother's death. A man who might still want revenge. I looked around the house, at the photographs, the covered furniture, the life I'd apparently lived and lost. And I realized that coming here hadn't been an escape at all. It was a reckoning. I spent the rest of the day searching. In the attic, I found boxes of legal documents, restraining orders against Jacob Brennan, police reports, letters from lawyers. In one box, I found a diary. My diary. The handwriting was mine, or at least a version of mine from 25 years ago. I sat on the dusty attic floor and read, my hands trembling. June 20th, 1991. I married Thomas today. I've never been so happy. He held my hand during the entire ceremony. And when Father Murphy said we were husband and wife, Thomas kissed me so gently I almost cried. This is the life I want. This is the man I want to grow old with. October 3rd, 1993, the garden is finally finished. Thomas built the raised beds himself. They're beautiful. I planted herbs, tomatoes, peppers. He says next spring we'll add berry bushes. Sometimes I watch him work and I can't believe this is my life. That I get to wake up next to him every morning. That this farm is ours. That we're building something real. February 5th, 1999. Thomas wants to drive to Bend for dinner. There's supposed to be a storm, but he says it'll be fine. We'll be back before it gets bad. I'm making a pie to bring to his mother tomorrow. She hasn't been feeling well. I lit a candle at church this morning and prayed for her health. Father Murphy says faith is trusting even when we can't see the path forward. That was the last entry. 3 days later, Thomas was dead, and I was in a coma. I closed the diary and sat in the fading light, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd lost. And I understood, finally, what Richard had done. He'd saved me. He'd taken a broken woman with no memory and given her a new life, a safe life. He'd loved me even though I couldn't remember the man I'd loved before him, and he'd kept this secret until his death, because telling me would have meant risking everything. But now he was gone, and I was here. And somewhere out there, a man named Jacob Brennan might still be looking for the woman he believed had killed his brother. As darkness fell, I went downstairs and stood in front of the photographs one more time. I looked at the woman I'd been, young, happy, in love, and I made a decision. I was going to remember. Whatever it took, however long it took, I was going to find out who I really was. And I was going to find out what really happened the night Thomas Brennan died. Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere in the darkness, I heard the sound of a truck engine, idling on the road beyond the property line, waiting. The truck was gone by morning. I'd sat by the window most of the night, watching the darkness beyond the property line, waiting for headlights to appear or for someone to approach the house. But there was nothing. Just the wind moving through the pines and the settling sounds of an old house trying to remember how to be lived in. When dawn came, gray and cold, I made a decision. I couldn't hide here forever. If I was going to understand what happened, I needed to go into town. I needed to find answers. Bend hadn't changed much in 25 years. Or maybe it had changed completely, and I just had no memory to compare it against. I drove down Highway 20 with my hands tight on the steering wheel, passing strip malls and coffee shops and a newer section of subdivisions that looked nothing like the rural landscape around the farm. The downtown was a mix of old brick buildings and tourist shops. I parked near a diner called Mary's, the same one from the receipts I'd found in the house, and sat in my car for a full 5 minutes, trying to gather my courage. You can do this, Eleanor. It's just a diner. But it wasn't just a diner. It was a place where the woman I'd been had eaten breakfast, had known the waitresses' names, had been part of a community, and I had no idea what I'd find when I walked through that door. A bell chimed when I entered. The diner was busy, morning rush, the smell of coffee and bacon grease, the clatter of plates and conversation. I stood near the entrance, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt. "Sit anywhere, hun," a waitress called from behind the counter. She was maybe 50. Bleached blonde hair pulled into a ponytail, and she didn't look up from the coffee pot she was pouring. I slid into a booth near the window and picked up a laminated menu I didn't really read. My heart was hammering. Around me, people ate and talked and lived their ordinary lives, and I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a world I no longer belonged to. The waitress came over, order pad in hand. "What can I—" She stopped mid-sentence, the pen freezing above the paper. Her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face. "Eleanor?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The waitress took a step back, her hand flying to her chest. Oh my God, it's really you." Every head in the diner turned toward us. The conversations died. I felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes, felt the shock rippling through the room like a stone thrown into still water. I started, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, I don't—" "Mary!" The waitress shouted toward the back. "Mary, get out here!" An older woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was maybe 70, gray hair cut short, glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at me, and I watched her face go through the same transformation. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. "Sweet Jesus," Mary breathed. "Eleanor Brennan, please," I said, my voice shaking. I know I must have left without explaining. But I didn't. I don't remember. I had an accident and I lost— You lost your memory. Mary came closer, her eyes shining with tears. "We heard. Your sister came and got you, took you back to Seattle. She said you didn't remember anything. Not Thomas, not the farm, not any of us." "My sister?" I blinked. "I don't have a sister." Mary frowned. "Yes, you do. Diane. She came after the accident, handled everything. Said you needed specialized care, that you'd never be the same." I felt something cold settle in my chest. I'd never had a sister. I was an only child, I was certain of that. Wasn't I? "What did she look like?" I asked. "This woman who said she was my sister?" Mary exchanged a glance with the younger waitress. Tall, dark hair, maybe 40. She seemed— Mary hesitated. "Honestly, she seemed in a hurry to get you out of here. The whole thing felt rushed, but you were in bad shape and we all thought— You thought it was best for me." I finished quietly. Mary reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was warm, rough with work. Sweetheart, you were broken. Not just the head injury. You were devastated. Thomas was your whole world. When he died, you... Her voice caught. We thought you'd never recover. And then when Jacob started... What did Jacob do? I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. The diner had gone completely silent now. Everyone was listening. Mary sat down across from me, still holding my hand. He blamed you. Said you were driving that night. Said you'd gotten Thomas killed. He showed up at the hospital, tried to get into your room. The police had to remove him. Then he started calling, leaving messages. Showed up at the farm. Your sister got a restraining order, but Jacob violated it twice before you left. I wasn't driving, I said. The police report said Thomas was driving. We know that, Mary said firmly. Everyone who knew you knew that. But Jacob, he couldn't accept it. He needed someone to blame, and you were there. I pulled my hand back, wrapping my arms around myself. Is he still here? In Bend? He moved to Redmond about 10 years ago, Mary said. But Eleanor, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. If you're back at the farm, if people know you're here, he'll hear about it. And I don't know if he's let go of that anger. Let me talk to him. The voice came from behind me. I turned to see an older man standing near the counter. Late 70s, thin, with a face carved by decades of sun and wind. He was wearing a sheriff's jacket, though the patches looked faded like he'd retired years ago. Eleanor Brennan, he said, and there was something in his voice. Recognition, sadness, maybe guilt. I'm Bill Hartley. I was the deputy who responded to your accident. I stood up slowly. You were there? He nodded. I was first on scene. I've thought about that night more times than I can count. He gestured to the booth. May I? I sat back down, and Bill slid in across from me where Mary had been. Mary squeezed my shoulder and moved away, giving us privacy, though I could feel the entire diner still listening. I need you to understand something, Bill said, his voice low and serious. That accident wasn't your fault. The road was solid ice. Thomas was driving. We confirmed it from the position of the bodies, from the injuries, from everything. He lost control on a curve. No one could have prevented it. Then why did Jacob think? Because he needed it to be someone's fault, Bill interrupted. Because random tragedy is too hard to accept. Because he was 26 years old and he'd just lost his only brother. And you survived when Thomas didn't. He paused. And because you couldn't defend yourself. You were in a coma for 2 weeks, and when you woke up, you didn't remember anything. You couldn't tell your side of the story. I felt tears burning in my eyes. What happened to me? After I left the hospital? Bill leaned back, his expression troubled. Your sister, Diane, she said her name was... She took you to Seattle. Said you'd be in specialized care. We tried to follow up to check on you, but we couldn't find any records. It was like you disappeared. Because I became someone else, I whispered. Someone named Eleanor Voss. Someone who married a man named Richard and lived in Portland and never knew she'd had a whole other life. Bill studied me for a long moment. Did this Richard know about your past? He must have, I said. He left me a letter. He knew everything. Then maybe, Bill said slowly, he was protecting you. From Jacob. From all of this. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the diner had started to return to normal. People whispering, silverware clinking, the coffee machine hissing. I need to see the accident report, I said finally. Everything from that night. Can you help me? Bill nodded. I can get you a copy. But Eleanor, if you're planning to stay here, you need to be careful. Jacob's not a violent man, but he's obsessed. And if he finds out you're back, I'm not running again, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. This is my home. Thomas left it to me. I have a right to be here. Bill stood up, pulling a card from his wallet. My cell number's on there. You call me if anything happens. Anything at all? I mean it. I took the card, and Bill left. Mary brought me coffee and toast I didn't remember ordering, and I sat there trying to process everything I'd learned. A woman named Diane, who wasn't my sister, had taken me from the hospital. Richard had known about my past, but never told me. Jacob Brennan had spent years blaming me for something I didn't do. And somewhere in all of this was the truth about who I really was. I spent the rest of the day at the Deschutes County Courthouse, digging through public records. I found the accident report, just as Bill had promised. The details were stark and clinical. Single vehicle collision, icy conditions, driver, Thomas Brennan, pronounced dead at scene, passenger, Eleanor Brennan, airlifted with critical injuries. But I also found something else. A lawsuit, filed 3 months after the accident. Jacob Brennan versus the estate of Thomas Brennan. Jacob was contesting the will, claiming that I was unfit to inherit the farm due to my mental incapacity following the accident. The case had dragged on for years, finally settling in 2003. The farm had been placed in a trust with provisions that if I ever returned, I could claim it. If I didn't return within 25 years, it would revert to Jacob. 25 years, this was 2024. The deadline would have been 2024. I'd bought the farm just months before the deadline expired. A coincidence? Or had Richard known? Had he timed it somehow? Arranged for me to find the property listing at exactly the right moment? I drove back to the farm in a daze, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. The sun was setting as I pulled into the driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. And that's when I saw him. A man standing on the porch. Tall, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face I recognized from photographs I'd found in the house. Older, harder, but unmistakably related to Thomas. Jacob Brennan. My blood turned to ice. I sat in the car, engine running, debating whether to back out and drive away. But something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the anger that had been building all day. Maybe it was just exhaustion. I turned off the engine and got out. Jacob watched me approach. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. His voice was rough, like he wasn't used to using it. "This is my property," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're trespassing? Your property." He laughed, bitter. "You didn't even remember it existed until a few days ago." "I know who you are," I said. "Jacob Brennan, Thomas's brother. And I know who you are," he shot back. "The woman who killed him." "I didn't kill him. The police report—" "I don't give a damn about the police report." Jacob's voice rose and I took an involuntary step back. "You were there. You survived. He didn't. You got to walk away and forget, and he's been dead for 25 years. "I didn't want to forget," I said, and I was surprised by how much emotion was in my voice. "Don't you understand? I lost him too. I lost everything. My memories, my life, the man I loved. And I've spent the last 25 years not even knowing what I'd lost." Jacob stared at me. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or doubt. "I loved him," I continued, my voice breaking. "I don't remember it, but I read my diary. I saw the photographs. I loved him with everything I had. And that night, I stopped, tears streaming down my face now. That night, I didn't just lose Thomas. I lost myself." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less hard. "Then why did you come back? Why now?" "Because my husband died," I said. "Richard, the man who saved me, who gave me a new life. He's gone. And before he died, he left me a letter. He wanted me to know the truth. He wanted me to come home." "This isn't your home," Jacob said. But there was less conviction in it now. "Yes, it is." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "I know you're angry. I know you've been angry for 25 years. But I can't change what happened. I can't bring Thomas back. All I can do is—" I hesitated. "All I can do is try to honor his memory. Try to take care of the place he loved." Jacob looked away, his jaw working. For a moment, I thought he might leave. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you," he said stiffly. "I found it in my mother's things after she died. She left instructions, said if you ever came back, I was supposed to give it to you." He held it out. I took it with shaking hands. "She never blamed you, you know," Jacob said quietly. "My mother. She said Thomas wouldn't have wanted me to hate you. She said—" His voice cracked. "She said I was dishonoring his memory by holding on to anger." "Was she right?" I asked softly. Jacob didn't answer. He just turned and walked down the porch steps, climbed into his truck, and drove away. I stood there holding the envelope until the sound of his engine faded into the distance. Then I went inside, turned on the lights, and opened it. The letter was dated December 2018, written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Eleanor, if you're reading this, then you've come home. I prayed for this day, even though I knew I might not live to see it. Thomas loved you more than anything in this world. He talked about you constantly, your kindness, your laugh, the way you sang while you worked in the garden. He was so proud of the life you were building together. The accident wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was ice and darkness and terrible luck. But Thomas wouldn't want you to carry guilt, and he wouldn't want Jacob to carry anger. I'm enclosing something Thomas wrote to you before he died. He'd been working on it for weeks. A letter he planned to give you on your anniversary. He never got the chance. Whatever life you've lived since that night, whatever you remember or don't remember, I want you to know. You were loved, deeply and truly, and this farm was always meant to be yours. May God bless you and keep you. With love, Patricia Brennan. I unfolded the second piece of paper with trembling hands. Thomas's handwriting was strong and clear. My dearest Eleanor, 8 years ago, I asked you to marry me under the oak tree by the north pasture. You said yes before I even finished the question. Today, I'm writing this letter to tell you what I should say every single day but don't always remember to. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Your faith, your strength, the way you see beauty in everything. You've made me a better man. When I watch you in the garden or see you light candles at St. Francis or catch you humming while you cook, I thank God for bringing you into my life. I know we've talked about having children, about expanding the farm, about all the plans we have for the future. But I want you to know that even if none of those things happen, I am already living my dream. Because my dream was to spend my life loving you. Whatever comes, Eleanor, know that you made me happy. Know that every day with you was a gift. All my love, forever. Thomas. I sank onto the couch. Thomas's letter clutched to my chest and sobbed. For the man I couldn't remember. For the life we'd lost. For all the years I'd spent not knowing what I'd been given and what had been taken away. And as I cried, something inside me began to shift. The anger at Richard for keeping secrets. The fear of Jacob's hatred. The confusion about who I was. All of it began to settle into something else. Acceptance. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of forgiveness. For Richard, who had loved me enough to protect me. For Jacob, who had loved his brother enough to grieve for 25 years. For myself, for surviving when Thomas hadn't. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and for the first time since I'd arrived at the farm, I didn't feel like an intruder in someone else's life. I felt like I'd finally come home. The days after Jacob's visit passed in a strange blur of motion and stillness. I woke each morning to the sound of birds I was learning to recognize. Steller's jays, mountain chickadees, the occasional raven. I drank my coffee on the porch and watched the light change across the Cascade Mountains, and I tried to figure out who I was supposed to be now. Not the Eleanor who had married Thomas. I couldn't remember her, couldn't force those memories back no matter how hard I tried. But not entirely the Eleanor who had married Richard either. That woman had been built on a foundation of unknowing, and now the foundation had cracked wide open. I was somewhere in between. Someone new, maybe. Or someone very, very old finally waking up. I spent those first weeks cleaning. It felt important somehow, to clear away the dust and decay, to make the house livable again. I pulled the sheets off the furniture and washed them in the ancient washing machine in the basement, hanging them on a line in the yard where they snapped and billowed in the wind. I scrubbed the kitchen until the counters gleamed. I replaced broken window panes and swept out the barn and cut back the overgrown grass around the house. Sam Carver stopped by twice, bringing firewood the first time and a casserole the second. My wife insisted, he said gruffly, though his eyes were kind. She remembers you. Says you used to bring tomatoes from your garden every summer. I wanted to say I wished I remembered her too, but the words felt hollow. Instead, I just said thank you, and Sam nodded like he understood everything I couldn't say. Mary from the diner brought a group of women one Saturday afternoon. Members of St. Francis Catholic Church, she explained. They'd heard I was back, and they wanted to help. I stood on the porch, overwhelmed as they unloaded supplies from their cars. Cleaning products, fresh linens, groceries, a basket of baked goods still warm from someone's oven. We take care of our own, Mary said simply, squeezing my hand. Always have. One of the women, small and silver-haired with a face like a grandmother from a storybook, introduced herself as Helen Martinez. You probably don't remember me, she said gently, but we used to sit together at Sunday Mass. You had a beautiful voice. You sang in the choir. I didn't remember, but I thanked her anyway, and when they invited me to come to Mass that Sunday, I heard myself saying yes before I'd consciously decided to. Sunday morning, I stood in my bedroom looking at the blue dress with white flowers, the one I'd found in the closet. The Eleanor who had worn this dress had gone to church every week. She had lit candles and prayed and believed in something larger than herself. I didn't know if I still believed. Richard and I had gone to church occasionally, Christmas and Easter, more out of habit than conviction. But standing there holding that dress, I felt something pull at me. A sense of continuity, maybe. A thread connecting the woman I'd been to the woman I was trying to become. I put on the dress. It fit perfectly. St. Francis Catholic Church was small and white-painted, with a wooden cross above the door and stained glass windows that threw colored light across the pews. I slipped in late, sitting in the back, trying to make myself invisible. But heads turned. People recognized me, and instead of the shock I'd seen in the diner, I saw something softer in their faces. Welcome, maybe, or relief. Father Daniel, younger than I expected, maybe 45, with glasses and a gentle smile, spoke about the prodigal son, about coming home, about how God's love doesn't depend on our memory of it, doesn't require us to earn it back, is simply there, constant and unchanging, waiting for us to accept it. I cried quietly in the back pew, and Helen Martinez, sitting beside me, took my hand and held it through the rest of the service. Afterward, people approached me carefully, kindly. They shared small memories, how I'd organized the church fundraiser in 1995, how I'd always brought flowers from my garden for the altar, how Thomas and I had been so happy together, it made everyone else believe in love. I listened and nodded and tried to hold on to these pieces of a person I couldn't remember being, and slowly, something began to shift inside me. Maybe I couldn't remember the past, but I could honor it. I could live in a way that acknowledged what I'd lost and what I'd been given. I could choose every day to be someone worthy of the love these people remembered. 3 weeks after I arrived, Emily called. "Mom, I've been trying to reach you for days," she said, her voice tight with worry and frustration. "Your phone keeps going to voicemail. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, sitting on the porch steps with the phone pressed to my ear. "The service out here is spotty." "Out where?" "Mom, where exactly are you?" I took a breath. "I'm in Bend, Oregon, on a farm." Silence. Then, "The farm you bought?" "Mom, I thought you were I didn't think you'd actually move there. That was just grief talking, right? A temporary thing?" "It's not temporary," I said quietly. "This is my home, Em. Your home is in Portland. Your home is where Dad—" She stopped, and I heard her voice crack. "Mom, you can't just run away because Dad died. That's not healthy." "I'm not running away," I interrupted. "I'm running towards something. How could I explain? Em, there are things about my past, about who I was before I met your father, that I never knew. Things he never told me, and I need to understand them." Another silence. "What are you talking about?" So I told her. About Thomas, about the accident, about the lost years and the woman I couldn't remember being. I told her about Jacob and the photographs and Richard's letter. I told her everything. When I finished, Emily was crying. "Why didn't Dad tell us? Why didn't he tell you?" "Because he was protecting me," I said. "From someone who wanted to hurt me, yes, but also from pain I didn't need to carry. He gave me a new life, Em. He gave me you, and I'll always be grateful for that. But you're saying you had another life before us? Another—" She struggled with the word. "Another husband." "I did, and I loved him. I don't remember it, but I know it's true. Do you—" Emily's voice was small. "Do you wish you could remember? Do you wish you'd stayed Eleanor Brennan instead of becoming Mom?" My heart broke for her. "Oh, sweetheart, no. Never. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and your father. You gave me 36 years of love and stability and family. I wouldn't trade that for anything. But you're choosing to stay there, in a place that doesn't even remember you." "It does remember me," I said softly. "That's the problem. Or maybe that's the gift. I don't know yet." We talked for another hour. Emily cried, asked questions I didn't always have answers for, and finally, reluctantly, said she understood, or at least she was trying to. "I'll come visit for Thanksgiving," she said. "I want to see this place. I want to understand." "I'd like that," I said. "I love you, Em." "I love you too, Mom." After we hung up, I sat on the porch watching the sunset and thought about the different versions of love in my life. Thomas, who I'd loved completely but couldn't remember. Richard, who I'd loved steadily, safely, for decades. Emily, who I'd loved fiercely from the moment she was born. All different, all real. None of them negating the others. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe that was what I was supposed to learn. October turned to November. I hired a contractor to fix the porch, replace the roof, update the electrical. I planted bulbs in the garden for spring, daffodils and tulips, the kind that would come back year after year. I bought chickens from a farm down the road and built them a coop with Sam Carver's help. Thomas would have liked this, Sam said one afternoon as we hammered the last boards into place. Seeing the place come back to life. I looked at him. Do you think I'm crazy? Trying to rebuild a life I can't even remember? Sam wiped his forehead with his sleeve. I think you're brave. And I think Thomas would be proud of you. I started going to Mass every Sunday. I learned the rhythms of it again. Or maybe for the first time, I couldn't be sure. The standing and kneeling, the responses, the communion line. Father Daniel noticed me after a few weeks and invited me to coffee. We met at a small cafe in town. He didn't push, didn't pry, just asked how I was settling in, if there was anything the church community could do to help. Can I ask you something? I said finally, stirring my coffee without drinking it. Does it count? Faith, I mean, if you don't remember choosing it? Father Daniel smiled. Faith isn't about memory, Eleanor. It's about trust. About showing up even when you don't have all the answers. He paused. You're here, aren't you? You're choosing right now to be part of this community. That's faith. But what if I'm just going through the motions? What if I'm trying to be someone I'm not? Or, he said gently, what if you're trying to be someone you've always been, and you're just learning how to remember it? I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. About the difference between remembering and knowing. About how maybe some truths live deeper than memory, in the body and the heart, and the small daily choices we made about who to be. In mid-November, Jacob came back. I was in the barn, organizing tools, when I heard a truck pull up. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to walk out calmly, to face whatever was coming. Jacob stood by his truck, looking uncomfortable. He had a box in his hands. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said quickly. I've been going through some of Thomas's things my mother kept. I thought you might want them. I walked closer. Jacob set the box on the tailgate and stepped back. Inside were photographs I'd never seen. Thomas as a boy, as a teenager, building the barn with his father, his high school diploma, a pocket knife with his initials, a Bible with his name inscribed on the front, and at the bottom, a small wooden box. I opened it. Inside was a ring, simple gold band with an inscription inside. T&E forever. My wedding ring. The one I'd lost in the accident. I looked up at Jacob, tears in my eyes. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice was thick. I'm sorry for hating you all these years. I'm sorry for making everything harder. Thomas loved you, and He stopped, struggling. I should have honored that. Should have let go a long time ago. I forgive you, I said. The words came easily, naturally. I forgive you, Jacob. He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out another envelope. One more thing, from Thomas's mother. She left instructions for me to give this to you too, but I couldn't. Until now. I took the envelope. Inside was a deed, the official transfer of the farm from Thomas's estate to me, finally clear of all legal challenges, and a handwritten note from Patricia Brennan. This land was always meant to be yours. May you find peace here. May you find yourself here. And may you know that you are loved by God, by this community, and by the memory of a good man who would want nothing more than your happiness. The farm is yours, Jacob said. Legally, officially. I've dropped all the claims. It's done. Thank you, I whispered. Jacob climbed back in his truck. Before he drove away, he rolled down the window. He was a good man, my brother. The best man I ever knew. And he chose you. I should have trusted that. Then he was gone, and I was standing in the driveway holding the deed to a farm I'd bought without knowing it had always been mine, wearing a ring from a man I couldn't remember but was learning to love all over again. Thanksgiving came. Emily arrived with her husband Marcus and baby Daniel, and I watched her walk through the house, touching the furniture, looking at the photographs, trying to reconcile the mother she knew with this other Eleanor she'd never imagined. It's strange, she said that night as we sat on the porch with blankets wrapped around us, the baby asleep inside, knowing you had this whole other life, this whole other love. Does it bother you? I asked. She thought about it. Maybe at first, but now, I don't know. It makes you seem more real somehow, more human, like you had a whole complicated life before you became just mom. I was never just mom. I said softly. But I understand what you mean. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Are you happy here? Emily asked. I considered the question. Was I happy? I was alone. I was 66 years old, starting over in a place where every face remembered a version of me I couldn't recall. I was navigating a grief that had two parts now, for Richard and for Thomas. I was learning to live with absence and presence at the same time, with memory and forgetting, with loss and discovery. Yes, I said finally. I think I am. December brought snow. I woke one morning to find the world transformed, white and silent and almost unbearably beautiful. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the chickens peck through the snow in their coop, watching the sun rise pink and gold over the mountains. The phone rang. It was Sam. Just checking on you, he said. Making sure you've got heat, enough firewood. I'm fine, I said. Better than fine. Good, that's good. A pause. My wife and I were wondering, would you like to come for Christmas dinner? Nothing fancy, just family. But we thought you shouldn't be alone. I felt tears prick my eyes. I'd love that, thank you. On Christmas Eve, I went to midnight mass. The church was lit entirely by candles, and as I sat in the pew listening to the choir sing, I felt something settle in my chest. Not quite peace. Maybe peace would come later, but something close to it. Acceptance. Maybe. Of all the versions of myself, of all the loves I'd known and lost, and was still learning to understand. When Father Daniel invited everyone to light a candle for someone they'd lost, I walked to the front. I lit one candle for Richard, one for Thomas, one for the Eleanor I'd been and could never be again. And as I walked back to my pew, I felt the weight I'd been carrying begin to lift. Not all of it, grief doesn't work that way, but enough that I could breathe a little easier, stand a little straighter. That night, back at the farm, I did something I'd been avoiding. I went up to the attic and brought down all the boxes I'd found. The photo albums, the papers, the journals. I carried them downstairs and arranged them on the dining room table. And then I began to read. I read my younger self's words, her hopes, her fears, her joy. I looked at photographs of a woman who looked like me but smiled more freely, who seemed to move through the world with less caution, less weight. I read about ordinary days and extraordinary love, about a life lived simply but fully, and I let myself mourn, not just for Thomas, but for the Eleanor who had loved him, for the years I couldn't remember and the future they'd planned together that would never happen. But I also let myself be grateful, for Richard, who had given me a second chance at life, for Emily, who had given me purpose, for this community that had held space for me even when I couldn't remember them, for the farm that had waited patiently for me to come home. When dawn came, I was still sitting at the table, surrounded by the remnants of two lives. And I realized something. I didn't have to choose. I didn't have to be Eleanor Brennan or Eleanor Voss. I could be both. I could be all the women I'd ever been, all at once, carrying every love and every loss, every memory and every forgetting. I could be whole even in my brokenness, maybe especially in my brokenness. In the weeks that followed, I established new rhythms. I joined the church choir, though I couldn't remember ever singing before. I volunteered at the food bank in town. I learned to make bread and left loaves on neighbors' porches anonymously, the way someone told me Eleanor Brennan used to do. I had lunch with Bill Hartley, the former deputy, and he told me stories about Thomas, how fair he was, how hard he worked, how much the community respected him. I listened and felt proud, even though I couldn't remember the man they were describing. Jacob stopped by one more time in late January. He didn't stay long, just dropped off a folder of documents, warranties for equipment Thomas had bought, instructions for maintaining the well, a hand-drawn map of where the property lines ran. "Just thought you should have these," he said. Then awkwardly, "If you need anything, if anything breaks or you need help with the heavy work, you can call." "Thank you, Jacob," I said. "That means a lot." He nodded and turned to go, then stopped. "He would have wanted you to be happy here. I think I knew that all along. I couldn't let myself believe it. We all need time to grieve in our own way," I said gently. "There's no shame in that." After he left, I walked out to the barn, to the place where Sam had told me Thomas had worked every day, building furniture, fixing equipment, creating things with his hands. I could almost see him there, almost feel his presence in the worn tools, the measuring tape still hanging on the wall, the radio covered in sawdust. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty barn, "for loving me, for building this place, for leaving me something to come home to." The wind moved through the rafters, and for just a moment I could have sworn I heard something that sounded like peace. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The bulbs I'd planted pushed through the soil. Daffodils bright as sunshine, tulips in shades of red and pink and purple. The chickens started laying eggs. I planted a vegetable garden, using the old beds Thomas had built, adding new soil, new seeds. On what would have been Thomas's 60th birthday, I drove to the cemetery. His grave was simple, a flat stone with his name, his dates, and a single line: beloved son, brother, husband. I laid wildflowers on the grave and stood there in the May sunshine, trying to find the right words. "I'm taking care of the farm," I said finally. "I'm taking care of the home we built together, even though I can't remember building it. And I'm trying. I'm trying to be the person you believed I was." A robin landed on a nearby headstone, cocked its head at me, then flew away. "I hope wherever you are, you're at peace. I hope you know that I'm grateful for the life you gave me, even though I lost it, for the love that's still here, even though you're not." I stayed a while longer, then walked back to my car. As I drove home, I thought about the strange, circular path my life had taken, from Seattle to Bend, from Thomas to Richard, and back again, from knowing to forgetting to learning to live with both. It wasn't the life I'd expected. It wasn't the life I'd chosen exactly, but it was mine, all of it, every broken, beautiful piece. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and watched the sun set over the Cascades. The sky was streaked with orange and gold, and the air smelled like pine and fresh earth. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thinking about coming out for your birthday next month, can't wait to see the garden." I smiled and typed back, "I'd love that. The guest room is ready." Then I set the phone aside and just sat, listening to the evening sounds. Birds settling for the night, the distant hum of a tractor from Sam's farm, the wind moving through the tall grass. This was my life now. Not the one I'd planned, not the one I remembered, but a life nonetheless. A good life, full of ordinary miracles and second chances and people who showed up with casseroles and firewood and grace. I thought about faith, not the kind that required certainty or memory, but the kind that simply meant showing up, planting seeds even when you weren't sure they'd grow, lighting candles even when you couldn't remember who you were praying for, choosing love and forgiveness and hope, day after day, even when, especially when, it was hard. And I thought about Thomas, somewhere beyond memory, beyond grief, beyond all the words I could never find to explain what I felt. I hoped he knew. I hoped wherever he was, he could see this place, the garden blooming, the barn standing straight, the chickens scratching in the yard. I hoped he could see me, finally home, finally at peace with all the versions of myself I'd been and was still becoming. "Thank you," I whispered to the twilight, to the mountains, to the man I'd loved and lost and found again in a different way, for everything. And as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt whole. Not healed. Maybe we never fully heal from the losses we carry. But whole in my brokenness, complete in my incompleteness, finally able to hold all of it at once. The grief and the gratitude, the forgetting and the remembering, the endings and the new beginnings. I was Eleanor Brennan and Eleanor Voss. I was the woman who couldn't remember and the woman who was learning how to live anyway. I was home. And that, I thought, as I sat on the porch of a farmhouse in Oregon watching the night come on, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. After my husband passed away, I spent my savings to buy a farm. Away from the city, but what I found. When I opened the door, left me in shock.